Are the leads of Votann men of stone, gold, or something else from the dark age of technology? There seems to be a lot of discussion about this when the original codex came out, and still now. So I'm going to give you my current opinion. We will examine lore from the codex, try and draw on wider dark age lore, and find an answer. So, welcome friends to another 40k video, and let's begin. For context on what I am saying with gold, stone and iron men, I think the men of gold were master geneticists who united Earth. The men of stone were part human, part mechanical life, like an Uber member of the Mechanicus. And the men of iron were servants of stone who rebelled against them. Keep that in mind as we go through the Votann lore. To start things off, the Codex tells us the Leagues of Votann are named in honour of Votann, the primal ancestor, the gilded one of the stone mind. Rumours say he is wisest of the first ancestors, and that they are a shadowy and ill-defined myth, and are shown in many forms, both humanoid and otherwise. So the easy and obvious one there would be the reference to a stone mind, man of stone, clearly, and this also matches with other excerpts. It said Votann is the wisest, so someone who knows technology which the kin value, and it also says they are shown in many forms, both humanoid and otherwise. Like the Mechanicus who adapt and evolve their bodies to fit their needs, I imagine the men of stone followed in that path, or pioneered that path it would be better to say, looking human and far from, depending on the level of innovation they reached for. Now let's look back into the history of the Dark Age and theorise when they might have left Terra. The Codex says, the truths they do accept say their earliest ancestors departed the homeworld almost certainly pre-imperial Terra on fleets of generation ships. The kin were cloned people from the start, and the Iron Kin have been with them since the earliest days. They set out as miners and prospectors and voyage dredgers, charged with exploiting of the riches of the heavens. So, Mytic aways our Iron Kin, cloned from the start and sent out as miners. So it seems the Iron Kin were sent out with the Votann, who were clones when they went out, and had roles as miners assigned to them. For me, this clearly placed it during the time of the Men of Stone and the Men of Iron, and that they were clones from the start says to me that the kin themselves might be of neither. They might just be a race made for a purpose to aid Terra and the Empire to fulfill a role given to them. Depending on the source, we get mentions during the Men of Gold period of the Dark Age that resources were running low, and that's the reason that humanity reaches out to the stars, which matches very nicely with the Votann. I think this next part sounds like the Men of Gold's manipulation. The ancestor can also be referred to as the Votann. The first ancestors are cited as agents of change, and held responsible for the majority of the stable mutations that run through the kin's gene pool. A deep pool indeed it is. The Votann are thought to have hardened the kin, both physically and spiritually. Some accounts claim this was in response to a perceived threat, others that it was done to ready the kin for their new home. One key change is they shine more dimly in the warp and have no psychic mutations. This to me says whoever made those changes within the kin could manipulate DNA, and at this stage it's been incorporated into technology used, so perhaps the knowledge went from the Men of Gold and was passed down to the Men of Stone. A legacy from both groups. We don't know if there were limits in terms of which rune group you were part of. Perhaps some of them that were gold went over to stone later. We just don't know. And I also think that the Men of Stone or Gold were those that ruled at the top, a smaller part of humanity, an elite. And yes, things like the genetics came down to the rest. Great ones for those around the time of gold, and robotic parts for those of stone who wanted to go further and learn more. But I think humanity in broad numbers would always have been human. Think on it. They are the ones remembered so long after their time. So that brings us to the other key element, the Iron Kin, the Men of Iron. AI that started a revolt and lost. AI with many different minds and forms. We have enough mentions to know that they were at one time guardians of the Dark Age Empire, defending borders from the Xenos. They even mentioned us going out with the Men of Stone to act as their hands. This leads me to feel that the initial Men of Iron were not smart enough to be self-aware. This took time. I think at first they were made by and served humanity in the roles they needed to, such as soldiers, explorers, etc., maybe even more menial work. Which brings us to the Iron Kin. It's fair to say, like the Men of Iron, when they went out, I think they were advanced and smart and were sent out with the Votann in the role the Men of Iron served when working with the Men of Stone, when those ships ventured out, as servants who became allies. This relationship developed and they are treated as just more kin by other kin. We were able to see this referenced in the lore and in the Kin novel. One way they might have served and earned that view of them is the key role they will have served in getting to the core itself. For example, amongst the abilities of the Ironkin is that to act as an Ironkin way finder. They can cogitate probable paths through the warp without psychic powers like navigators, which by the way I think came later. The Kin make warp plungers that are short and controlled. These jumps take longer but are more reliable. Warp travel to the galactic core is notably difficult. Maybe that's why they had generational ships and why travel took so long to get there. So we have one more thing to address, the Votann ancestor cores. They were created to go out with the original mining fleets. Within them is held all the knowledge they might need to succeed in their task of finding a life amongst the stars, weapon specs, gene information, science and STCs to make things. They have taken on a spiritual aspect and declined in their cogitating, but that's not super relevant to us here. The ancestor cores are AI filled with knowledge to complete their task, with an STC aid on top of that. I think most shipped out Votann and other colonists had some type of STC of relevant information to what their lives were going to be like when they reached the colony. And we see one example of this, an STC in the Father of Titans in the Grey Knights books by Ben Counter. I think they would have been added whatever made sense, so humanity can essentially 3D print the tools they need when they need them. So that again for me says likely Men of Stone, the ancestor cores playing the role of an advisory supervisor AI, likely commanding the Ironkin. Perhaps as the ancestor cores degraded, this allowed the Ironkin to develop more mental freedom and be more individuals. So as a whole, I think that during the Dark Age of Technology, Votann were sent out during the Men of Stone, being assisted by Men of Iron period, with AIs to aid them on missions to find resources to grow the human empire and aid Terra, which is low on resources, so more must be found elsewhere or consumed by the people of Earth elsewhere. The ancestor cores and Ironkin being Men of Iron, but the kin themselves being just themselves, squats or kin, generated as clones in a perfected Dark Age of Technology way to fulfill their role, yet not been part of the elite that sent them out. That's my current conclusion. I find it evolves and keeps evolving, and it's one where I can see arguments for many interpretations of the lore. And if you like this video on 40k, then you might also like this one. There are also 2 40k related playlists on the channel. One has everything, one is one that specialises in the Dark Age of Technology.